a lot of this is their fear that someone will turn out gay or trans or what in somewhere in the queer community. Although it's really interesting, those same types of people are suddenly not homophobic, but only in the context of we don't want you to be trans. When they're
Yeah.
like, gay is
Oh, it's
fine,
much
just
better.
don't do trans. That I've heard they've said that. Like I've heard people literally say that, but then those same people will like turn around and be like, oh, we actually want to get rid of gay stuff too. Hey y'all, it's me, Peppermint.
And I'm Hugh the historian.
And this is Queer 101, the podcast where we talk about pretty much anything we want, including queer
Anything
history,
at all.
and that's true, and queer literature. Now, if you don't know, last week we had the opportunity to interview the fantastic, the effervescent Miss Tourmaline about her New York Times best. I won't say that. I'm not going to say that publication's name anymore. The best-selling
Bestselling.
biography about Marsha P. Johnson entitled Marsha. Yeah. And if you didn't get a chance to check that out, you should go check that out. There you have it.
She is just such a great speaker. Like, I so enjoyed talking to her because it's one thing, to do all the research. It's one thing to find all of this information. It's another thing to write it all down. It's another thing to make a film about it like she has done. But to then also be able to have such a fun, easy, quotable conversation about it. Like, I mean, she just brings Marsha to life. And I gotta say, the thing that really stuck with me that I've been thinking about all week since we talked to her is what she was saying about dreaming, about Marsha's practice of dreaming, getting hotel rooms, even back in the early 60s when there was so much repression, so much, naked fascism like what we're seeing today. And Marsha's ability to imagine a world beyond that, right? Like, I love that. That was what gave her the ability to be who she was in the streets, in the Stonewall riots, in her performance art. Like, that ability to dream despite everything else. That's just stuck with me. How about you, Pep?
I mean, agreed. It really breathed life into Marsha as a person. I could, and I've seen clips and videos, obviously, but there's surprisingly, given how modern or recent, like all things considered in terms of history that she was with us, there's surprisingly not that much out there. And especially in comparison to what we would have access to today. And so, like, getting a chance to read her about her life and have it that, like, just become so 3D and in color, I could almost hear the tone of her voice at certain things, certain quotes and certain things happening. And, like, her laugh, and it's not just, like, the words, like, her laugh or the way that, Tourmaline would describe how her voice sounded at a certain time with, and I just think that's just like a wonderful gift because it allows her to obviously live on. But one of the things that I think was just really, that I'm really grateful for is, my hope, speaking of dreams, my hopes and dreams, it really did become a reality when it comes to reading this book because in addition to this being the first book, officially her biography, but the first book of Marsha P. Johnson, period, we were able to see, I kind of got the backstage feel from her with this book that I wouldn't have gotten. You don't get on like the placard that's down on the statue or the whatever.
Right.
And, it made me think a lot about working in the clubs backstage behind the scenes with a lot of the girls. And there were always, obviously I worked in the drag clubs and even in the book, they speak sort of through the context of drag in a lot of conversations with Marsha. But there were always trans women there. Obviously, I identify as trans and I, am a drag entertainer. But there are others who are drag entertainers who don't identify as trans, but have had certain levels of gender affirming care or surgery, be it hormones or things like that. Like it was very common when I was coming up for the girls, the drag entertainers, for everybody to be taking estrogen to soften up. just to soften up. I'm just softening up. I'm not sure, like that's what they would say. And that certainly could have been something that other people have done before us, the generation before us with Marsha. But what's
Yeah.
clear is Marsha knew the difference and expressed the difference for many people saying, oh, she was a drag queen. Like, we know she was a drag queen and no, we don't know that she was trans or we don't know. It's
Hmm.
in here, it's in writing, and it's in her own words. She was able to demonstrate, no, this is a trans person, this is a drag queen, this is what I do, this is what I'm doing, this is what my plans are. And she had all that sorted out. And I think that that is just such a legacy.
I agree. And
Because
she
there are
gives
people
us.
today that are saying it's brand new. There are literally people in the wake of the politics that are happening right now that are saying, what is this trans thing? It all started with when Obama came around.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And I
now we
think when
have the proof.
we have the proof like this, we have her words, we have all of this evidence. And I think back to those days when you were in the clubs performing and I was in the clubs watching you perform, and how little language we had for these things. It's not that long ago, but certainly like people were not yet able to have a conversation about our queer ancestors in a way that respected them in the mainstream, like, and even in queer spaces. Like, I can remember in the 90s taking a lot of like history classes
Drugs.
and
Okay.
queer identity classes. I can vaguely remember it. I was a baby, a very advanced baby. But we would read books that are incredible, books that are important, books that are really foundational to queer studies. I'm thinking like books like Gay New York, and these books would talk about people who we today would obviously say that is a trans woman in the 1850s. She doesn't have that language for it, but by the way she talks about her life, herself, her identity, we can see that they're a trans woman. And these books in the 90s would say things like, he dressed in women's clothes and took on a woman's name to signal that he was a homosexual. And they just could not see
It
the
would not.
complexity of our community and our ancestors. And so I love that this is where we're starting our podcast, like our expanded media world of podcasts, because this is such a beautiful moment in history where the community, the people who were there on the streets, are able to define. Marsha says, this is who I am, this is what a drag queen is, and she's not waiting around for some academic to
Mm-hmm.
write it down incorrectly. She's out there making those definitions for herself. And I think that's the kind of ancestor we need. That's the kind of dreaming we need. That's the kind of
Mm-hmm.
liberation we need.
It's really interesting because she explains it the way that she talks about it in the book. It comes across. It's not that dissimilar, given that it was 35. I don't know when she had those conversations specifically, but obviously at least more than 30 years ago. Uh, it was not that dissimilar to how we would talk about it today. Yeah, some of the language is different, some of the terminology is different, but like the way she explains, this is a drag entertainer. That's a person who is assigned male at birth, or basically a man who's dressing as a woman for a show. Here's a cross dresser or a transvestite who's dressing in the women's clothing. And the funny thing is, the through line in her explanation, as you'll read in the book, hopefully, folks, is drag and women's clothing. So that's the sort of like denominator. Like, a drag queen is a person who puts on gets in drag to do a show. A transvestite is a person who's in drag just during the day because they like it. And then a transsexual, and that's the terminology that was being used then, is a person who never takes off the drag. And like, I thought that was really interesting, the way she put it. But I also, again, we had talked about this last week in the episode, in the wake of the shooting with Charlie Kirk, the really vicious sort of hunt and dedication to assigning before we even knew who anybody was, assigning the blame for not only this shooting but retroactively all mass shootings, which is wild to me, on trans people. It's really interesting how quick they are to give the gift of transness, to bestow transness onto someone who hasn't even said it
Yeah.
when it works for them. But when it's like, oh, Marsha, honey, we have been trying to convince people that Marsha was trans for the whole time. And it's like, good grief, you know what I mean? Or when somebody asserts their transness, then there's all this scrutiny in modern time. Oh, you're really, you think you're not really, like there's all this like scrutiny. And I'm
Prove it.
asking myself, yeah, prove it. And I ask myself why, besides the discrimination and the transphobia of it all, is this. I was talking to a friend the other day, and they were talking about, gender affirming care, access to gender affirming care for youth, and the notion that the need to be cautious, probably for anybody who's trans, but certainly for people who are young, because what if this is not what they want permanently? What if they shouldn't make this decision now? It's too soon. They should wait until they're sure. Blah 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 blah. And I asked them. I was like, why? Like, he was like, because somebody could think that they're trans that's not. And I was like, and then what? Like, what will be, so what will happen? Like, why is that bad? Like, why? And I think that they realize that a lot of this, when they're talking about not what, and it's quite obvious, but it's just about hearing them admit it. A lot of this is their fear that someone will turn out gay or trans or what, in somewhere in the queer community. Although it's really interesting, those same types of people are suddenly not homophobic, but only in the context of, we don't want you to be trans. When they're like, gay is fine, just don't do trans. They've said that. Like, I've heard people literally say that, but then those same people will like turn around and be like, oh, we actually want to get rid of gay stuff too. But my point is that like there seems to be this fear and this desperation, I guess, in a need to save heterosexuality and as if all of humanity is going to lose the ability to procreate if someone becomes trans, and that's what it feels like it's at stake for them.
That's the thing that drives me fucking nuts, because some of these people will say to you like, I'm just worried, that this child is going to not be fertile when they grow up. First off, the word fertile is disgusting to me.
It's disgusting.
Hearing it applied to children,
cows
you're
and
just like,
livestock.
yeah, like that's not. But also, when they're saying that, to be clear, like what they are saying is, I am concerned about a cis child who somehow accidentally ends up, having some kind of procedure or hormone that renders them unable to have children. They are not out there advocating that we do the work to find out how can trans people have children? How can trans adults, right? They're worried only about fertility because they're only worried about actually cis kids. They're not worried about how trans youth are going to grow up and have kids because they don't want trans youth to grow up and they don't want trans youth to have kids. So if anyone brings up that argument to you, if they're like, oh, I'm worried about trans children and their ability to, have children, then say to them, yes, we should be funding more research into all kinds of different wombs and gametes and all of these things for trans adults. And then all trans people can have children. And see how they react to that. And I think you'll learn real quick what they actually care about.
Clearly, they're not going down that damn path.
Because they don't think about anything. They just, like you said, they don't want to give the gift of transness to those who deserve it. They only want to inflict it as an insult because that's what they think it is. It's pathetic.
Yeah. It's wild.
That's one of the things that I don't know. I don't want to speak for you, but I do think that over the last 30 years, I don't think this book could have been written. Even if all the information had been out there, I don't think the Marsha book could have been written even 10 years ago. Like, the conversations that are having out there, we have moved beyond that. But I think that's the world, I don't know, you and I grew up in. Like, I don't remember any real discussion of trans people, trans life, trans identity when I was a kid anywhere in the mainstream.
I did, not in the same way though. It was always sort of from the spectator's point of view. It was never from really, it wasn't originated and derived from or inspired by the needs, the hopes, the wants, the dreams of the trans person. It was always, we're going like a very voyeuristic, Oh, let's look in. Hey, everybody, here's a trans person. Now, so and so is a so and so, and look at them. They look like a
It's
so
like
and
an
so.
episode of
And
Maury
yeah,
Povich.
exactly. And it's always on famously, Jared, the only time that it ever actually, I can't say the only time, but the time where they've really gotten to the practice of bringing trans people on and having them speak from their own perspective that I can remember. The show that was the most prevalent in it was shows like Jerry Springer, which were notoriously violent shows that would suddenly, a trans person would come on to profess their love for somebody and then get beaten up by like nearly the whole room. And so that's what I remember in mainstream, but it was all, for the most part, it seemed really in style. It certainly was in fashion.
Yeah.
The three things that were in fashion that I can remember, the two things that were definitely in fashion were around the same time, which was like the late 80s, very early 90s, was bisexuality and drag queens. Very in fashion. And then I think trans folks, the thought of being transgender was kind of brought in with that. I'm not saying that it didn't exist. I'm saying in terms of the mainstream's fascination with those things like late 80s, starting off with things like maybe like the Crying Game. Of course, that wasn't the first time
Yeah.
anybody talked about somebody being trans, but I'm talking about the mainstream cis hetero, culture, like getting a hold of it and feeling like it's theirs to dissect. The worst representation today, retroactively, but would start with
Yeah, the
things like
Crying
that, and
Game.
then yeah,
And Ace Ventura, that's the other one I remember. I mean, it was awful, but
yeah,
that's the other big mainstream depiction that I remember from that time period. That wasn't, like you said, the reality shows, the like sort of like Maury Povich-ness shows. Those are the ones that come. And then of course there's Tu Wong Fu, but Tu Wong Fu is interesting because I feel like it's like they profess that they're not trans women in the
but they
movie,
lived
but
as
then
trans women.
yeah, they never get out of drag, and at the end, they're like, "I've been waiting my whole life to hear someone say I love you to the name Miss Vita Boheme," right? So it's like there
Yeah.
were these depictions, but you're right, they didn't come or inhabit like real transness, and that's I think what this book brings to us.
And I do think that a lot of people, I think the crossroads for an understanding about trans identity and drag can be this sort of fraught, tragic figure who clearly is very effeminate, works in the context of drag for sure, but desperately wants to be this woman that they will never be because they weren't born that way, and hopes and wants and I want, and in that on that avenue, I can see the writers of a show, of a Tu Wong Fu saying, I hope that someone would always say I love you to that name, because even that makes sense to somebody who's a drag queen and wants to be recognized. They hope, but they don't go any step further. And I think what especially in the around that time in the 80s and 90s, that step, what was that step? They didn't take that step towards transness, into their transness. The step into their transness in the 80s and 90s was having full surgery, full bottom surgery, sex reassignment surgery, everything, like having an operation. That's what they
Yep.
would call it back then. But I think today that step is just acknowledging it and just saying and just claiming it for yourself and saying, I'm a trans person. And then
Yeah.
that's where the step into transness starts, which is maybe the difference. And that's what Marsha did in the book. And I'm happy that she did that. It would have been, I would have been happy had she not. I'm happy that we know and have clarity on what we suspected and were denied for so long.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can speak from my personal experience. When I was 18, 19, 20, I was really exploring my gender identity, trying to figure out like what it meant to be me. I had very long hair. I wore stereotypically women's clothes and makeup. I was a women's studies major. I was not comfortable with, I mean, what we would now call being a cis man, but I did not and had not experienced myself as being a woman and did not think of myself that way. And I was sort of universally told there's no space there. That's not an identity. That's just like dressing androgynously, right? There was no place, even though I tried to articulate it to people as a feeling of like not just style, but about being who I was and identity. And I tried all kinds of words: trans, genderqueer, androgynous, bio boy, like all of these things. And there was just, it often felt like no space to explore that stuff, that it just literally felt like that didn't quite exist. That step that you're saying wasn't quite there yet, to go from there to this is a valid way to identify, this is a valid way to be. And I think that that's another like incredible change. Like I love seeing the proliferation of like non-binary identities and folks who are using either they them pronouns or neo pronouns like Z and here. Like those things have been around, you know, like Marsha, decades. They go way back. They're not new, but now they're recognized and they're valid, and we have like current creators like Tourmaline writing about our ancestors and how we can now look back and say like there are so many steps.
Yeah,
I really love it.
I think so too. And it's really interesting because I remember one of the I'm not sure if you saw my message, but the one of the just kind of going on what you're saying, or you know, a lot of the a lot for me, when I was talking about any aspect of my queerness or connecting any of my aspect to my queerness, it was sort of in the context of I'm coming out to people and I'm the only one that I know that is that it's not like I'm in a room full of everybody that's like, hey, we're feeling the same way. And so I think regardless, whether it was in the club or earlier years in like school, you know, I don't want to speak for you, but for myself, that was my experience. Like there just weren't enough people that felt comfortable being out at the time to get us to the point where we could then, you know, talk about the nuances of identity. And oh, like we're all queer, but oh, you feel that way? I'm a little bit this way. You know, like we were just like, is anybody else here? You know?
Am I alone? Am I alone?
Yeah.
It's funny. So I've got this memoir coming out next year that talks a lot about this. It's called My Bad, and it's a collection of essays. But one of them is actually set partially inside Tunnel, the nightclub.
Oh my gosh. Are you kidding my face? I'll
I
kill you. I
fucking
love it.
loved-
I better not say that
love
these days.
Tunnel.
Good grief.
And I can remember this like incredible moment at like 4 a.m. as the club was clearing out, where a performer who was at that time identifying as a drag queen, we ended up in like a drunken conversation in the bathroom about, she was like, I have this guy and he only wants to sleep with me in drag. And she was like, but my problem isn't that he only wants to sleep with me in drag. My problem is that I don't mind. And she was like, I didn't think of myself as a trans woman, but like,
Was
if
that
I'm okay with
upstairs? In the
It was
unisex
like-
bathroom or the downstairs?
Yeah.
Okay.
In
And
the
okay.
unisex one at like 4 a.m, it was like totally cleared out. And I can remember thinking like, this is the deepest conversation I have ever had about gender identity.
In
And
a club at the damn tunnel.
Yeah, a club, tunnel, bathroom, right? Because you're right. Those were you had to find other people to have those conversations with. And that, I think, really stuck with me, you know? And I don't know where her life went after that, but those spaces where you found those other people, I mean, we learned to love them, right? Like you were so, I was so
my
excited, at
gosh.
least. Yeah. It made everything different, those clubs.
It was honestly the best. I think about it like I love being able to share and connect with people on social media. And obviously I have my like close group of girlfriends that I call and we go to each other's house. But when it comes to just like basic community, right? I'm not talking about, there's obviously different versions and forms of community where there's like, you know, your family. But I'm talking about like strangers or the component of people that you don't know that you meet and now you're in community with them and you find out you have a lot of things in common. In that regard, I would say the club world, but specifically the tunnel, probably having a lot to do with the size of that. It was a mega club. The size of it and how it was laid out, that you could find those, like, yes, there's thousands of people dancing on the dance floor, but you can also find the like, let's just have a one-on-one, and you didn't have to like go that far in order to do that. And it was very easy to do. But anyway, that was really special to me because I remember there were people that I would see every week when I was working there over the years, that I would see every week, who I had the deepest conversations with as well. And that I would look forward to seeing them every week because we didn't have each other's phones or any of that. I'd be like, oh my God, I'll see you next week. Like almost like you're going to see a coworker tomorrow. Like I was that sure I would see them next week. And lo and behold, I would see them next week. But these are people that I had deep conversations with, shared all these things. Some of these people, I didn't even know their names.
Yeah. It's amazing. Like those intense spaces that you created back when, like you said, no social media. There was no way to keep in touch. You got to have that conversation the moment you got to have it, and you had to have it in a queer space because you couldn't have that conversation out on the street or at Starbucks and feel safe. You needed like to have that place. And I got to say that's one of the things when in the Marsha book she talks about the importance of Marsha as a performer, as a musician, Marsha's connection to dancing, to space, you know? Like, I just felt like, oh, that is an experience that has changed in my lifetime, but I really feel that we had an experience very similar in that sense to what happened in previous generations, that you went to the bar or the club because that was where you could meet people. And not just sexually, not just to date, but like to have relationships, friendships, even if they never existed outside the bar, you know, and that's a different world now. That's not what people need in the same way, though I think we still need it somewhat. But certainly for all of us who were out and about before like 2005, those spaces really meant something.
Yeah, you know, and it's really when you talk about like her love of dancing and it's just there's so many I can't there's probably like 10 times more moments in the book that they talk about holding a dance that I because they obviously had obviously the Stonewall and bars and clubs, but like actually parties that were dances. And then also there was a moment in the book, and I'm not sure whether it was directly from like Tourmaline writing about, or if it was who's of course the author and the biographer, or if it was a quote from Marsha, but referring to dancing. And at that moment in time, for the first time ever, I envisioned Marsha dancing, and I never have. I've never pictured Marsha dancing and experiencing joy beyond. I know that she had a beautiful smile and an infectious laugh. Like that is, and that's one.
Right.
That's great. But I never thought about that, and so that's one of the things that I'm just so grateful to the book, Marsha, and to Tourmaline for bringing us.
Yeah, you know, actually, until you said that, I just realized that I never pictured her dancing either, and now that's going to be like my like personal dreaming homework is to sit down and think about that and to picture that joy, because that's the other thing about Marsha. Like you said, the smile was always there, but this book really brings up like joy as active resistance, joy as active community, joy as a way of healing from trauma, you know, and I associate that already with Marsha. But I had not put that together, that dancing and how important that is, and how, I don't know, for me, it's like being on the dance floor like embodies something. It brings it out in me. And so when so much of queer life was spent with dancing at the center of it, and yeah, drinking and drugs and all the other bad things that we know were in the clubs, but like putting the body and dancing and excitement and joy at the center of things, I think is really beautiful. And that's what this book does, as well as everything else.
And honestly, you know, it is. This sounds so like, you know, so I don't know how this will sound, but you know, it is liberation. I have to think back to, you know, even certainly stories about my ancestors here who were enslaved, and you know, under so much pain and oppression and whips and chains and horrors and atrocities, that there are moments, whether it's a Negro spiritual or other moments of just celebration, because we know that a lot of the songs and the lore and even down to styles were used to literally liberate as maps, as codes, as coded language. But the act of resistance through experiencing joy in the face of literally while you're in shackles and chains and things like that, And I think that like the emotional shackles and chains and the sort of oppression of having the police coming in and raiding the only place where you can go to feel safe and free that's not on the street, there's a threat of the mafia or the police working together, organized. That's literally organized crime. And you feel there's a sense of oppression there, but you being able to dance on the dance floor, which is obviously liberating and freeing, and you can be in the moment where you're dancing on the dance floor. If your whether your eyes are closed, and even if you're alone or not, you can be whomever you want to be. If you haven't been able to come out as trans, you're a trans woman on that dance floor dancing. If you whoever you are, you're experiencing all these different things, and that's how I experienced being in the club and dance. And I'd like to think, I'd hope that that's how, it certainly seems like that's how a lot of our queer ancestors were experiencing, dance, their queerness and their liberation through dance. And one of the things I want to try to go into before we wrap is not to get into, but I'm hopeful that maybe in the next episode we can talk about the connection to gender affirming care and seeking it and sort of negotiating how to achieve it and how to afford it and where to go. These are all things that folks, everybody deals with, but obviously trans people definitely deal with today, that Marsha and Sylvia and many other women, several women that she mentions in the book, were also dealing with. And I think that's really fascinating. So I'd love to take a dive into that, something, or at least for a moment, in the next episode.
I love that, because I think, as you pointed out in our interview with Tourmaline, like, that is information that, in regards to Marsha, has been repressed, right? Her experiences with gender affirming care is part of what people have hidden in an effort to like reduce or deny her transness. So yeah, let's get into that. Let's get into the nitty gritty about care and what it means historically and in the present. I think that's a great note for us for next week. I think that when we reconvene, all y'all, please, if you've had thoughts, drop them into the comments. Come back, connect with us. We're excited to hear. Were you in those clubs with us? Who else was at Tunnel in the 90s? And what do you remember from the bathrooms? What conversations did you have in the clubs? And now we're gonna leave you all with this quote, this one fantastic quote that was actually on the back of Marsha, on the biography. It's not actually from the book itself, but it's a quote about the book that really, like, just, it meant so much to me, and I think y'all will enjoy it. It's from Janet Mock, the incredible New York Times bestseller herself. She called Marsha a revelation. With meticulous research and a tender touch, Tourmaline brings a groundbreaking activist to life. This literary tribute, adorned in garlands and glitter, is a must-read for anyone seeking to understand the enduring legacy of an icon's fight for liberation. And I think all of us, I don't want to claim too much for me individually or for you, but for all of us listening and everyone who is doing this, and for Tourmaline, the fight for liberation and the enduring legacy of Marsha P. Johnson and her icon status is why we're here. It's why we can do what we do.
Icons only, darling. Stand up when you're talking to a queen. Listen, thank you all so much for listening to this episode. As Hugh mentioned, this is we're at the very beginning of a new page or a new chapter in our podcast. As we mentioned earlier, you can go back and listen to previous episodes, right? That are currently out. We've got so many exciting things coming, but we're all for the next few episodes, we're going to be diving deeper into Marsha by Tourmaline. And we would love to hear more about it. Of course, if you want to go do a deep dive and even get access to that interview, you can go on over to alstora.com and check it out. But in the meantime, make sure that you are subscribed, that you click that notification bell so that you can receive more about when every single time we get a new video up, you'll hear about it. And we will see you on the next video. For now, I'm Peppermint.
And I'm Hugh the Historian. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
This podcast is part of Pride House Media, hosted by us, Peppermint and Hugh, produced and edited by Josh Rosenzweig, with original music composed by Nell Balaban.
If you enjoyed this episode, then don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a rating and a review. It really helps others discover the show.
You can stay connected and join the conversation by following us at Peppermint 24/7 or write to us at questions@queer101podcast.com.
Thank you for listening. And remember, our history is your history. Stay proud, stay curious, and we'll see you next time on Queer 101.